Good morning. It's wonderful to be here in clear blue skies and AQI 39. We come from Delhi, where, of course, as you know, we gasp for air. So it's really lovely to be here. And it's lovely to have Mani Saab here. And I wanted to start off with saying that, in the book, when you start in the preface of the book, you say that you were a reluctant writer. Chiki Sarkar, you were a reluctant writer, and your publisher, Chiki Sarkar, had to sort of persuade you to write. And now you have 3 volumes of your memoirs. So, from not being able to write to filling up 3 volumes, can you take us through the
Well,
journey, please?
the conversation you refer to took place in 2013,
Uh-huh.
and I didn't start writing till 2020.
Yeah.
And the reason why I started in 2020 was COVID.
Yes.
So at one stage, I intended to dedicate the books to COVID 19.
Well, lots of
But
books like that.
people were horrified at that suggestion.
Yeah.
So I changed it. Yes, I was extremely reluctant to write it because I've achieved nothing. I mean, what is there for me to write about? I've just been at Sharmista Mukherjee's book
Book thing, yeah.
discussion on her father. You compare his achievements with my failures, and the gap
But
is huge.
but I think it's not really, I mean, and I think what is wonderful about your volumes is that it isn't really about, I mean, I think also how do you look at achievement and not achievement?
Yeah.
Isn't public life also achievement? And I will go back to you being in some ways a pioneer of public diplomacy, but we will talk about that later at your stint. But essentially, it's also about chronicling. And I think what is exciting really about publishing right now is that the chronicles of life of people lived experience. And I think that's really important. And I think you have wonderful lived experience. So why not that?
Well, if I was going to write an autobiography, I had to take account of the first 40 years or so, 42, 43 years, when I was not involved at any high level of government. I was just a regular diplomat, a
Yeah.
civil servant, and I felt that I could not introduce my political life
Yeah.
until I had explained my background.
Hmm.
So that background became my first 50 years.
Yeah.
Because by a coincidence, I was set up as a candidate just a few days after my 50th birthday.
Hmm.
I was elected a member of parliament soon after my 50th birthday.
Mm.
And I lost Rajiv Gandhi just
Soon
before
before-
the election
Yeah.
in 1991. He was my patron. He was the one who
Mm.
had inducted me into the service. So I suddenly found myself with total achievement as
Yeah.
far as entering parliament is concerned and a completely uncertain future
Mm.
because the only reason I had opted to come into politics was the patronage and friendship of Rajiv Gandhi,
Yeah.
who was 3 years younger than me at school.
Yeah.
And therefore, I didn't know him, but of course, he knew me.
Yeah.
And then we in Cambridge, he was the rich guy who was taking his girlfriend out to the best restaurant.
Mm.
And I was looking for a girlfriend who'd cook for me.
Uh-huh.
I was so
Well,
poor. So
yeah.
we had nothing to do with
Yeah.
each other. And completely unknown to me, Rajiv brought me into the Prime Minister's office
Yeah.
about a month after he was elected with a huge
Which majority, yeah.
an unprecedented majority. And I went to work for him in a slightly cynical mode,
Yeah.
thinking, well, I'll try and teach this idiot a few things.
Yes.
But when I actually started working with him, I found he was a factory of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever he saw, whatever he heard, he would immediately link it to some project that he wanted to undertake.
Mm.
And eventually, I rose from being his manager tours and travels.
Yeah.
That was my first job.
Okay.
Into being his sounding board for ideas that nobody else, certainly at the official level at PMO, was willing to accept. For I was thrilled with his project for a constitutional amendment on Panchayat.
Panchayati, right?
And that Mr. Aluwalia in particular, but all the others,
Yeah, I
thought it
think.
was an eccentric idea that I had foisted on Rajiv.
Uh-huh.
Equally, he was very, very anxious and interested in seeing that our cultural
Yes.
renaissance that had taken place under Jawaharlal Nehru and Indira Gandhi should reach the people of India
Yeah, the zonal cultural.
and the zonal cultural
Yeah.
centers. So I got very excited at that idea, and most people thought I was mad. I should be dealing with relations with Washington, with
Yes.
Moscow. Here I was saying I want to go to villages and show them in Haryana, for instance, what
Yeah.
is Karnataka culture.
Yeah.
Take Kerala to Sikkim, bring Sikkim to Kerala.
Yeah.
I found that such an exciting idea. So I ultimately found a Mish in the Prime Minister's office as being the eccentric guy who was very fond of Rajiv Gandhi's eccentric plans. And that is how I happened to establish a relationship which enabled me to then make the leap from diplomacy into politics.
Super. So eccentricity I think in generally is a good thing. I mean, I think if you look at it as writers, all writers have to be eccentric at some point of time or sitting down and writing. But I want you to talk about the anecdote that you had really in. I want you to talk about the anecdote that you have about astrology, and you said you became 50, right? And there was somebody in Brussels who made up a plan for you and said that by this time you will be you will be world famous, or you will be this thing. So
Yes,
yes, can you
that
talk
was
about that?
extraordinary.
Yes.
I was named the conference spokesman for the non-aligned summit, which Indira Gandhi organized in 1983. And although I had already been the official spokesman of the Ministry of External Affairs, I was not allowed, or nobody was allowed, to mention my name. Only my designation could be there.
Yeah, yeah.
But when I was named the conference spokesman, my name was allowed to be published. So suddenly in March 1983, every day the newspapers were carrying my name. And I had a cousin by marriage called Sri Krishnan, who was something of an astrologer. And because I'm an atheist, and I think all this astrology, numerology, all this stuff is just bogus nonsense, which misleads people. When Sri Krishnan came to Delhi in March 83 and said to me that he had cast my horoscope and that horoscope showed that on the 1st of February 1985, I would transition into becoming a national figure.
Yeah.
So this was in my mind, and I said it's just hocus pocus and mumbo jumbo. So I didn't give it any attention. But then Mrs. Gandhi had me transferred from the External Affairs Ministry to the Information Ministry. Now, I've heard of people being punished for their vices, but this is the first instance and the only instance I know of a person being punished for his virtues.
Yeah.
Because I had been specially put in charge of informing the Sikh diaspora outside India that the instructions given to the Indian army when they invaded the Golden Temple was that they should avoid shooting at the Harmandir Sahib because that is the sanctum sanctorum, but they could fire anywhere else. And it became my principal job to inform the Sikh diaspora that as far as the Harmandir Sahib is concerned, it was not damaged, it was not put on fire, it was not shot at. And this work, I didn't realize every day I had to send a report to the foreign secretary. And he asked me to copy it to a joint secretary in the Prime Minister's office. And I didn't realize that Indira Gandhi had asked Rajiv to look after external publicity. So he was receiving a report from me every day.
Yeah.
When I was in the INB ministry, when I was the joint secretary looking after the Sikh diaspora, and it appears that it was then that it struck the team of Rajiv Gandhi that I should perhaps be inducted into PMO to do my job there instead of trying to do it in the INB ministry. In any case, my minister didn't know what to do with me, but he was fearfully proud of having a foreign service officer with the ridiculous designation of information advisor to the information minister.
HKL Bhagat, right?
So then suddenly Indira Gandhi was assassinated. And this guy, this obscure character called Rajiv Gandhi, was sworn in as the prime minister. I was personally completely horrified. I said, this guy has no experience at all, and he's being made the prime minister when there are so many others, and I had particularly in mind Sharmista's father Pranab, available with deep experience at approximately the same age to become the prime minister. So anyhow, he was made the prime minister. Then followed the Sikh riots. I was terrified because my wife comes from the Sikh community.
Mm.
And I had thought that after the completely unwarranted pogrom on the Sikhs would retaliate. So I and my children would perhaps be attacked by the Sikhs while the Hindus attacked my wife. So it was for me a personal horror story. And I said, this guy is not able to do anything about this. Why should he be the prime minister? But then I was persuaded because that the only way I could get out of INB was by going into PMO. And so I went to see Arun Singh, whom I vaguely remembered from school. And he said it was a very good idea and I should meet Sharda Prasad. And Sharda Prasad would let me in. But Sharda Prasad saw that I was his rival. So instead of encouraging me, I could see that he was very dead opposed to me.
Mm.
And so when I wrote my note, he saw to it that it was taken to PC Alexander and rejected by PC Alexander. And so I was informed on the 7th of January that I was not even going to be considered
Yeah.
for the PMO. So at that point, I began wondering what should happen. And the hand of God intervened. PC Alexander was discovered 1 week later to have been presiding over a nest of spies.
Yes.
His entire office was involved in leaking every government secret to a Romanian diplomat in exchange for a bottle of whiskey. And so Alexander had to resign. So my big block was removed. So I then went to see the foreign secretary. And he said, well, you go and see the foreign minister, who was Khurshid Alam Khan. So I went to Khurshid Alam Khan and he said, look, the prime minister sent you there. Only the prime minister can bring you back. So I seized the opportunity. I said, sir, will you recommend to the prime minister's office that I should be repatriated to the foreign service? He said, if you'll write the note, you write it. And without changing a comma, this long note, which was my praise of myself and what a superb officer I was sent by Khurshid to the Prime Minister's office. But instead of accepting me, Rajiv just signed the note and sent it back. So I realized that I wasn't going to be in PMO. And the Foreign Secretary said I could take any job I wanted. So I became Joint Secretary for North America. And I then started writing to Sri Krishnan. I wrote to him
Yeah.
that you had predicted that I would become a national figure on the 1st of February. This is now the end of January.
Yeah.
And I, instead of being a national figure, I'm in an obscure job on the second floor of the Ministry of External Affairs. and I don't know what the future holds for me. On the 31st of January, Mr. Rasgotra, the Foreign Secretary, retired. And so he held a reception in Hyderabad House. I was also invited. And as I walked in, the first person I saw was Sharda Prasad. And he said, "You know that note of yours? It's been accepted." I was so stunned that I walked past him without inquiring further. Then I saw Ramesh Bhandari, who was to become the foreign secretary, and he said, "Welcome, but you come into the ministry only to go out again." So then I realized that the Prime Minister's office had indicated that I should come in there.
Yeah.
And sure enough, on the 1st of February, literally on the 1st of February, I was sitting with the foreign secretary when Gopi Arora of the PMO rang and said, "Welcome on board." So it should have strengthened my belief in astrology, but I'm absolutely convinced that it was just coincidence.
But he got the date.
Then I read an excellent definition of coincidence. It was by Albert Einstein.
Yeah.
He said, "Coincidence is what happens when God does not want you to see his hand."
Ah.
So I'm still confused as to whether there is a God or not, and whether astrology is absolute nonsense or a remarkably accurate science.
Well, I think in your case, it has been a remarkably accurate science. But I wanted to talk to you about, you said that when Rajiv Gandhi first comes, you're not necessarily his first. You were not, you were reluctant to accept him, and I think you write that even in the book. And then and you say one thing about the Sikh riots, and you said in the book that if Rajiv Gandhi had apologized for the Sikh for 84, things would have been different.
Well, whenever I talk about Rajiv Gandhi, my opponents, and they are numerous, especially from the Sikh community, they want to know, how do I justify the Sikh program? Well, the first clarification I give is that the Sikh pogrom took place when I was not in PMO, when I had decided that I would vote against the Congress and I would vote against Rajiv Gandhi for what had happened to the Sikh community. After all, 3,000 of them, innocent people, had been killed in what was the worst massacre of a minority that independent India had ever seen. So I was only looking at it from the outside. But when I was in PMO, I discovered something that I did not know, and the general public perhaps does not know. It is that he had entrusted the control of the riots to the most senior minister in Indira Gandhi's cabinet, who was not Pranab Mukherjee, it was P.V. Narasimha Rao. P.V. Narasimha Rao was the home minister, but God had made him not with a skin, but with Teflon. So, no Sikh commentator that I know, no adverse opinion that I know, has ever questioned the role of P.V. Narasimha Rao as Home Minister in this rioting, or rather this pogrom. Equally, the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi was one Mr. R.S. Gavai, a very senior civil servant. Nobody has blamed him. But after Rajiv Gandhi saw on the 1st and then the 2nd of November that these two guys were completely incompetent and incapable of taking any decisions, they hadn't even called out the army.
Hmm.
And the Indian army had a camp in Delhi cantonment. 12 years later, I met Major General Jamwal, who was the commandant of the unit in Delhi. And he told me that because the government of India wanted to prevent a coup d'etat from taking place, the unit in Delhi was always kept below strength. And the idea was that if the army had to be called out, they would be called in from Meerut, which is only 40 kilometers or so away. So they could have called in the army, they didn't. They could have recommended to the prime minister that he call in the army, they didn't. So when Rajiv found that his two principal advisors, the Home Minister of India and the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi, were it was just beyond their capacity, he then brushed aside security and drove his own car to the most affected areas, including Pocket 32B of Trilokpuri, where a huge massacre had occurred. And he came back and ordered himself the Indian army to come in. And the Indian army came in the next day and they controlled the riots. So far from blaming him for running this thing, it was he who stopped it. So when on the 19th of November, which is Indira Gandhi's birth anniversary, he made a speech in which he said, among several other things, it was a kind of throwaway line which some people attributed to Javed Akhtar. He said that when uh, the earth shakes, then the big tree falls. And this was taken as his excusing the rioters. But if you look at the total of that speech, in the line before he says it, he says it's a disgrace to Indira Gandhi that all these people were killed. He says that no blood should flow. He has quoted Indira as Gandhi saying, don't shed blood, shed hatred. So if you put it in context, you can see he was making a factual statement. But those who are interested in denigrating Rajiv Gandhi, and there were many, because you can't win 404 seats, which grows to 440 without disappointing a lot of people. And all those people cottoned onto this one line, especially when Atal Bihari Haha Jajpai said Rajiv Gandhi has got it wrong. It's not when the earth shakes that a big tree falls. It is when a big tree falls that the earth shakes. Ha 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 ha. And this became the the leitmotif of the abuse that was directed at Rajiv, with the result that the full title of my book is not The Rajiv I Knew. The full title is The Rajiv I Knew and Why He Was the Most Misunderstood Prime Minister of India. So that is what the book is about, his achievements, his failures. I have been brutally frank about what I think was a mistaken decision to send the IPKF to Sri Lanka, but don't think that was a mistake. The mistake was that when the LTT opened fire on the IPKF, he should have either negotiated a truce with the LTT, and he could have done it by threatening to withdraw the IPKF. Then the LTT would not have acted. And if the LTT had continued, he should not have endangered the lives of Indian soldiers. I've said it all. But at the same time, I have pointed out that it was he who solved within 7 months of becoming prime minister the most difficult problem that Indira Gandhi had faced. It was created in Morarji Desai's time, and neither Pranab Mukherjee nor PC Alexander nor any of the big people there could solve the problem of Punjab until Rajiv went to the border of Pakistan to honor the memory of Bhagat Singh and put out his hand of friendship to Sant Longowal and negotiated an agreement with him which ended the rioting and murder and massacres that were taking place in Punjab. When I went to Punjab at that time, I came back and Delhi people were amazed. You went to Punjab? Because to go to Punjab was to invite an assassin's bullet.
Mm.
But there were various reasons why I had to go, so I went. And here was Rajiv brushing aside everybody, forgetting the fact that his mother had been massacred by two Sikh bodyguards whom she had retained because
Mm.
she told security, I will not remove Sikh security guards from my detail because that would show a lack of faith in the Sikhs. And here was Rajiv Gandhi, who sorted out not only Punjab, but also Assam,
Mizoram.
also later on, just a year later, Mizoram. Then he went on to handle Darjeeling. Every one of these restored peace in a fractured country, which he had inherited from Indira Gandhi. And I think we should give due credit for that. Most of all, I would give credit for what he did in Mizoram. It is such a remote part of our country that most people think it is named after Lord Ram and they call it Mizoram. It is not Mizoram. Mi means Mi means mountain. Zo means people.
Yeah.
Ram means the people of the mountain.
Yeah.
Because when they went to live in the valley, they got mosquito bites and they died of malaria. So therefore, they went into the hills. So this Mizoram had been under insurgency for 20 years, from 1966 to 1986. And that's because it shares a border with East Pakistan. So Lal Denga and his rebels would take refuge in East Pakistan and then conduct border raids into Mizoram. Rajiv said one thing to him. It's exactly what he told the Akalis, it's exactly what he told the Asu. That you want power, I'll give you power. We'll hold an election, even though it's not due, and I'm sure you'll win. So you come and prove that you've got the faith of the people. So the Akali Dal came into power in Punjab. The ASU came into power as the AGP, the Oshom Goro Porishad in Assam. And Lal Denga became the biggest rebel, 20 years. He became the chief minister of Mizoram. And who was his deputy? Laltan Hola, the congressman. And for 20 years, Lal Denga had attempted to assassinate Laltan Hola. And yet, he persuaded Laltan Hola to accept this assassin as his chief minister, and democracy was brought. And today, the most peaceful state in India, despite all these refugees coming in from Myanmar, is Mizoram. So, therefore, his achievements have been simply obscured by a completely false allegation that he took money, 64 crore. The present guy has 6,000 crore from electoral bonds, which are being contested in the Supreme Court. Anyway, 64 crore. And he announced that I have nothing to do with this. Eventually, the Supreme Court in 2001, after years and years of litigation, came to the conclusion that neither Rajiv nor any civil servant connected with him had any pecuniary benefit from the Bofors deal, and the Bofors gun proved its worth in Kargil. And yet, if you ask Generation Next, what do they remember about Rajiv Gandhi? They say, oh, he was the crook who took money on Bofors. It's quite untrue. So that's why I wrote that book.
But yesterday when we were speaking, and you also make two other comments about him, which I thought were very interesting. You said that two of your criticism was one was Maldives, because you said it sets tone for the idea of Indian hegemony. And the other thing you say was, which was very interesting, was that he had this vision for a nuclear free world, yet he was the one, he sort of nodded. Can you talk a little bit about how Maldives has sort of led this belief about muscular diplomacy, and why you think that a nuclear free world, and you were very opposed.
Let me first take Maldives.
Yes,
Because that's
please.
very important.
Yes.
The Maldives elected president, Gayoom, was overthrown in a military coup that was mounted from Colombo and undertaken by people who came on ships. Gayoom went into hiding and was able, through his foreign minister, to get through to Rajiv to say, please save democracy in the Maldives. Within a few hours, the Indian Air Force flew out Indian troops to Male, the capital, and within a few hours of their landing, that is less than 24 hours, the entire coup d'etat was crushed, and India was regarded by most of my colleagues in PMO as having established that we are a blue water power. That is, we can go into the Indian Ocean, and that we are now established that we are the power that matters in South Asia. I was horrified because I saw no reason at all why the India of Gandhi, Nehru should be a hegemonistic power. That's the kind of thing that the Chinese do, not the kind of things that Indians do. We've never gone out of our country except under the Shoras when they went into Indonesia and Malaysia and so on and so forth. But that was a different era. And that was when the expansion of the Shora Empire was taking place. But for the rest, we had huge empires, but we had conquered through our soft power, through our religion. I'm talking about Buddhism, not Hinduism. Well, partly Hinduism too, and through the cultural influence of Sanskrit. So that was our strength, not military might. And these people were beginning to see that to be a big power, we should be a military power. And I said, if we start doing that, we'll become the United States of America of South Asia. And that our path forward should be on Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's lines, which is that we look upon the world with clear and friendly eyes. And I'm afraid the macho displayed then is now being displayed very much so by the current government, who have the courage, they have the guts to undertake surgical strikes against Pakistan, but don't have the courage to sit across a table and talk to the Pakistanis. Now, please tell me, what is the right thing for India to do? To threaten its neighbors? To behave as it did in Nepal, where they have passed their constitution with a huge majority after 7 years, and Mr. Modi sends his foreign secretary, a guy called Dr. Shankar, to go to Kathmandu and tell them, look here, you passed your constitution, but you can't promulgate it. Postpone the promulgation. And a Nepali paper wrote that Dr. Jaishankar is behaving like Lord Curzon. So the goodwill that had been created in the northern reaches of our defense perimeter, it resulted in the opposite thing. Nepal became very pro-China. And as I sat at an airport in Kathmandu and looked at the signs, I was horrified to find that there are more flights from Kathmandu into different destinations in China than there are to destinations in India. And the Chinese have come in. So all we've done is provoke exactly what we don't want. And look at what's happened in Pakistan. This is a danger that people have not noticed. That China is no longer across the Himalaya. They have come into Pakistan. They and the Pakistanis are today at the same point in the Indus Valley where Alexander was in 326 BC. They can just walk in from the Indus Basin to the Gangetic Basin. That is the threat we have. And instead of dealing with this threat by talking to them, something that has been happening is part and parcel of the army manual, that if there is a cross border attack in the Kashmir region, particularly, by which I include Jammu, then the Indian army moves a few yards into Pakistan, and like the game of kabaddi, it goes kabaddi, 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 touches the opposition and runs back. It's been happening for the last 10, 15 years. And suddenly, this new government picks up two words of English. They don't call it in Hindi, they call it in English. They say surgical strike ho gaya. There's nothing new about the surgical strike. And I'm so glad Sharmishta mentioned this in our session a few minutes ago. So then they went to Balakot. Now, what happened in Balakot, nobody knows. But I asked the former Pakistan foreign minister, Kasuri, who is a friend of mine from my Cambridge days. I said, why did you people not retaliate? And he said, we did, to the extent that you damaged anything. So we decided that we would attack your aeroplanes coming into our space. They brought down one. And they said the other was that we hit a target near Srinagar in Budgam, but we did not hit the airport because you had not hit an airport. So therefore, I'm not sure what the Balakot regime did, except that it gave Mr. Modi the biggest victory. His Rajiv Gandhi movement came in 2019, and the Congress was too weak to be able to respond. So that's these are things that we need to look at. In Rajiv's time, we had an opening to Pakistan, and most important of all, we had an opening to China. And when he went to China, he signed an agreement that eventually resulted in Pranab Mukherjee as the foreign minister signing the Treaty of Peace and Tranquility on the border in 1993. Rajiv's visit gave us 35 years of peace on our borders. And he thought that the negotiations would last a few months and we would settle the border. But it's gone on. For 35 years, we haven't settled the border. For 35 years, we kept the peace, and then Galwan Valley took place. And now we have the defense minister of India, the Raksha Mantri, proudly proclaiming, and it's the one thing I completely agree with him. He said dialogue is the only way of resolving problems. Shabash, wah, wah, mashallah. Aapne kya kya nahi kaha. But in that case, if you will talk to China, because it's a big country, why don't you talk to Pakistan? Because it's a small country. Is this the way for Gandhi's India, for Nehru's India, for Indira's India, for Rajiv's India to behave? We want to be the bully of South Asia. But but I wanted to ask you about Pakistan, and I know we have very few minutes. I just wanted to talk to you about your stay there as an enemy country, and you had a lot of love, and you still are most possibly the most popular consul general. Certainly one of the most. I mean, even though you weren't ambassador, but you were certainly the high commissioner. But you were certainly the most popular diplomat, Indian diplomat that went to Pakistan. And I wanted to ask you what you talk about dialogue. Do you think there is a possibility, and do you think there's hope? There's not only a possibility, there's a certainty that if we tell the Pakistanis we are ready to talk to you, they'll be ready to talk to us. And to talk to Pakistan does not mean to accept their terms. You sit down to discuss things, not with a friend. What are you going to discuss with Paraguay, for instance? There's nothing to discuss except to say, I'll send you a cultural delegation and I'll send you a film made in Kerala or Andhra Pradesh or Tamil Nadu, because these are the only states of India that produce anything creative. In Bollywood, they produce rubbish. So we'll send you one of those pictures. That's all you can do with Paraguay. But when you sit down with Pakistan, you're talking to somebody who has an agenda in which he says, I don't agree with you on point number one, point number two, point number three, point number four. And we'll talk about the other things later. And you say to him, I too have an agenda. I want to talk to you about point number one, point number two, point number three, and point number four. And we'll talk about the rest later. So let's decide which is the first point we're going to take up. Do we take up Kashmir or do we take up cross border terrorism? And the Pakistanis have said to me on track too. And I know Pakistan very well. The only one who knew Pakistan more than I did was Mandira's grandfather, uh, Kuldeep Nayar, who was in many ways a great influence on me and whom I met in Pakistan the first time. He showed that we are distant neighbors. We are neighbors, but we are very distant from each other. We are geographical neighbors and mentally apart. And can we get together? Of course we can, if we talk. And the proof is that under Manmohan Singh, and at the instance of an initiative taken by Vajpayee ji, two people were sent for a back channel talk. One was my friend Satindra Lamba on the Indian side, and Tariq Aziz, who was a personal friend of Musharraf, was sent on the back channel. And the two of them met in different venues around the world. And at the end of 3 years of talking to each other, came up with a formula called the 4 point formula. What was it on? Cultural exchanges? No. Visas? No. Was it about trade? No. Was it about transit facilities? No. It was about Kashmir. 4 points to settle the Kashmir issue based on saying that Kashmir cannot be independent. Both Pakistan and India say Kashmir cannot be independent. But what we can do, set both of these people together, is that we can ensure that between the Kashmir which is under the administration of Pakistan and the Kashmir that is under India's administration, there will be freedom of movement of people, particularly to meet their relatives. Second, that there'll be some trade, local produce that will be exchanged. Third, that there will be an attempt made to ensure that there is an equal measure of democracy in both halves of Kashmir. And fourth, if possible, we set up some kind of a mechanism to monitor these arrangements. And then we conduct a review a few years from now to see how that's working. That is an agreement that Musharraf called the 4 point agreement. So we talk to Pakistan, we can find a solution even to Kashmir. The Indus Waters Treaty. How did that come about? The technicians talked to each other, they failed to arrive at an agreement. Then Ayub Khan took over. And when Ayub Khan took over, he said Punjab needs water. That is, Pakistani Punjab needs water. So settle the bloody thing is his typical army language. Yes. Settle the bloody thing, he says. And the civil servants settled it. And the Indus Waters Treaty has survived 3 wars. 3 wars acknowledged by the two sides, and 5 wars according to us. So we can talk to the Pakistanis. Indeed, whom else do you talk to? If you go to Paraguay, you have to use a Spanish interpreter. If you go to Pakistan, all you need to do is to bone up on Punjabi swear words. And Punjabi essentially is Hindi with the mother and the sister added. So you sit down with the Pakistanis, you talk to them in their idiom, you'll agree on something, you'll not agree on many other things. But instead of that, you say you'll do surgical strikes, you'll do Balakot, you'll put our soldiers in danger. They're all being killed. Why? For what? What are they being killed for? Why should we endanger their lives? So, therefore, I believe that Rajiv took the right step in being the first Indian Prime Minister in 28 years to visit Pakistan.
Yeah.
And was the first Prime Minister in 30 years or more, was it, to visit China.
So,
And that has set the tone. And today, we say, no, no, the Chinese are trying to encroach on our territory. Our territory is India, bhaiya. Our territory is not Pakistan, is not Bangladesh, is not Sri Lanka, is not Nepal, is not even Bhutan. But Mr. Modi, Emperor Modi, calls all these people for his coronation, as if he's Akbar, as if he's King George undertaking the darbar. How can you humiliate your neighbors like this? And why do they get humiliated? I don't understand. But
And-
if you can call them for your swearing in, why can't you call them for your swearing at?
yeah.
You just talk to them,
That's-
say what you want,
Yeah.
and
And-
you will not agree to anything that they
Will not
want you
force
to agree
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. On that note, we have possibly two questions. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to be.
Excuse me.
I'm the person, the gentleman here, and I'm going to ask if there's a lady because of gender. You see, is that okay? So it's only two questions. Gentleman
to
here,
time
right in front, and the
restrictions,
lady there.
we can only afford two
And he's got the
questions.
mic in your hand. Okay, so can we? Okay, three then quickly. And anybody else who has a question, Mani Saab is signing. So go and question him, dialogue, and get buy a book. Jeez.
Uh, Apart from Bofors, it was my first election, 1989, as a voter. Apart from Bofors, it said that Rajiv Gandhi basically lost because of three reasons. One is the Shah Banu case. Second is the, unlocking Babri Masjid and that dispute. And third thing is the rigged Kashmir elections. What do you have to say about that?
I would request you, on all three, I would request you to kindly buy my
Buy the book.
If you
He'll
like,
give-
I'll give you whatever now. I think it's 600 rupees or something. I'm willing to subsidize you
To-
because the answers to all three
Uh,
are given in great detail,
Detail in the
but to very, very, in one sentence, sum up what requires a full day's argument. On Shabano, he did not reverse the Supreme Court judgment. Who said this? The Supreme Court itself. The Supreme Court itself, in a judgment given in 2004 February, said A, he did not reverse the 1985 judgment. It said, in fact, he gave legislative sanction to that judicial judgment with his Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Bill, or Act 1986. It said it did not, his action did not infringe any of the fundamental rights of Muslim women. And it said that he had creatively interpreted that judgment. And this was portrayed as if he was anti women.
yeah.
And I remember him telling me, and that's in the book, he said, even Sonia disagrees with me. He,
So-
like me, was very dependent on his wife. So when he said, even Sonia disagrees with me,
you know,
you can see the strength of conviction. He said, we cannot say no to the Muslims for their personal law. What we can do is to say that the interpretation of Muslim law by these qazis and mullahs and I don't know, mutawalis and so forth is wrong. So we'll give it to the judiciary.
to find a
So if a woman who's getting divorced is not paid her entire maintenance for the rest of her life within the 3-month period of iddah, she can complain to the magistrate, and starting with the magistrate, it can go up to the Supreme Court. So that is what he did. He actually protected Muslim women without asking them to change their religion or change their law.
Mm.
I mean, leftists very easily say, because they don't have any God, they say, yeah, yeah, just change it. But even the Hindu reformed law came after the Special Marriages Act of 1954. So if you have a Special Marriages Act, which is the one under which I got married to my Sikh wife, and still have Hindu reform, well, we can do this bill and then have Muslim reform. But who will do the Muslim reform? How can Parliament, where we have a Muslim representation of 4%, when we passed the Hindu code bills, there were 80%, 90% of members of Parliament belong to the Hindu religion. So I've always wondered, how can Parliament decide what Muslim personal law is? And many Muslims believe that the personal law derives from the principles that are stated in the Holy Quran and the Sunnah and the Hadith. So there is something sacred. It is connected with the identity. Now we have idiots saying all these girls sitting here should remove their. Why should they? Why should they? Why you can easily say all those women sitting there should put it on. It's ridiculous for us to decree to them whether they should turn west and pray to Makkah or turn east and pray to the rising sun. So, therefore, we cannot have a democracy without recognizing the identity of our communities. And recognizing their identities means allowing them to have their personal law and leaving it to them to correct their personal law. Now, they've all accepted that the Qazi will not decide whether a woman, a divorced woman, has been paid all her dues. That will be decided in a magistrate's court. And never forget that Shah Bano was, was given the judgment by Chandrachud. That is the father of the current Chandrachud, who determines his judgments after consulting God. We don't know which God, because there are 33 crore Hindu gods. Anyway, he consults God. And a very pertinent question was asked. What if the Muslim judge said he was consulting Allah? There'd be a rumpus in this country. So therefore, we need to understand that in a diverse country, there will be diverse
Opinions.
ways of dressing, diverse ways of eating, diverse ways of conducting ceremonies, even Deepavali, which we've just celebrated. It is celebrated for different reasons in different parts. In Bengal, they make it a Kali Puja. In Tamil Nadu, they make it a worship of the killing of Narakasura. Here in Kerala, Deepavali is not important, it's Onam that's important. Because this Kerala was created on that day by somebody whose ancestor had been killed as symbol
Yeah.
of evil. So therefore, there's so much diversity. How can you insist on a single code?
That's
It's only people who want to convert India into a Hindu Rashtra, make us into a Semitic country, who want a uniform civil code. The rest of us are perfectly happy that these 4 or 5 girls sitting in front of you should have their own marriage vows,
yes.
and everybody else has their own.
Thank
And
you
then if
so
you don't want any religion, take the Special Marriages Act. It's the most fair act that the country has. And I want to know why that act does not cover the Hindu undivided family. The HUF gets tax concessions.
Ah.
But if the Muslims set up an MUF, a Muslim undivided family, they will not be given those tax concessions.